Hello, and welcome to One-on-One with Robert Doar. I'm your host, Robert Doar. As president of the American Enterprise Institute, I have the unique privilege of working with America's greatest policy experts. These scholars focus on policy issues in the fields of education, economics, energy, foreign and defense, and so much more. Subscribe to this podcast for exclusive access to in-depth discussions on the most pressing policy issues. Together, with my guests, we'll challenge political preconceptions, explore innovative ideas, and create, I hope, a freer and safer world. I hope you'll join us. So this week we have Danny Pletka, who has been a long-standing member of the AI community and former head of our foreign and defense policy team, and really one of the most dynamic public participants in the national debate on foreign policy for a long time, and a great hero at AEI. Everyone here loves her. Our listeners should know Danny is very popular with the younger staff, which is greatly appreciated by me because we have so many younger staff. We like our scholars to be nice to them. But today is October 7th, 1 year after the horrendous, awful, disgusting invasion of Israel by Hamas. And a lot of the commentary that I'm reading, Danny, says that October 7th was a turning point and that the world is different. Israel's situation in the world is different. The Jewish people feel differently. Do you feel it was a turning point?
I do. Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored, and thank you for the nice comments. And thank you for running an institution this year especially. I've always been proud to be part of AEI, but this year especially, when so many institutions, particularly institutions that are academic in their orientation, have not just disappointed, but I think betrayed the values that we stand for in America. And it really, and I know I'm not the only one who feels like this. I know it's a lot of our scholars, a lot of our wider community, but it is a real object of pride for me that to be part of a place that stands tall in support of our allies and our principles.
Thank you.
Yes, it was.
But you are our leader, Danny. You're the one that makes that happen.
That's not.
I couldn't survive if I was anything else because you wouldn't let me.
Oh, well, I certainly wouldn't let you. You're right about that. You got that straight, Robert. But no, look, I do think it was a turning point. And, you know, in America, the expression inflection point has become like the expression hero, almost meaningless. He's a great hero, crossed the street without getting hit by a car. And I think that expression is often overused. In this instance, however, I think it was not just a wake-up call, and this was what I wrote on the little Substack that Mark Thiessen and I have that accompanies our podcast. This was a turning point for all of us who support Israel, and especially for the Jewish community, because damn, Robert, we didn't know so many people hate us. And that, I think, has been a wake-up call and a call to action.
Yeah, I agree. I'm stunned by the rise or the existence of anti-Semitism, especially on college campuses in the United States. I come from Brooklyn. We don't have that as much in New York City as I guess they have it in college campuses around the country, but it's been a disappointment. But I wanted to ask about, I read somewhere today that said until the invasion, there had been a kind of golden period before of peace and stability. Is that really true? Because, there was the Abraham Accords, there were things happening. Gaza was a gift. Gaza had been settled. And then this happens. And did you feel surprised?
I mean, I think I was certainly surprised. I think everybody was surprised at what happened. And yet they shouldn't have been, we shouldn't have been. I don't think it was a golden period. I think it was sort of more akin to that, that sense that you were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And no, actually, it was an oncoming train. For the Israelis, particularly during the Trump administration, and we call balls and strikes here, but this was a good accomplishment of the Trump administration. The Abraham Accords really were a turning point. It seemed like for the first time Israel was really just going to be accepted into the Middle East. Obviously, the Iranians were going to be outliers. The Iranian vassals were going to be outliers. But, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, were added to Jordan and Egypt. And, I think Israel felt like it was kind of one of the boys. And the problem was...
It was prosperous. It was booming. The technology sector was going great. Tel Aviv was as nice a city as there is in the Mediterranean. Everything was good.
Kind of great.
Yeah.
Right. Except that's never the way it is. And one of the problems is, I think, and there hasn't been a formal commission to investigate what happened on October 7th yet. There will be once the war is done. But I think that the Israelis got fat and happy. And the nation was in the throes of sort of very serious political arguments about judicial reforms and about the Supreme Court. And Israel lives on its military reserves. Everybody is in the reserves after their mandatory service. And you were having reservists say, well, we wouldn't answer a call up. That's how distressed we are with the actions of the government. Now, obviously, that ended up in the event not being true. But this was sort of how fat and happy everybody was. And the other thing that they did that we know very well, and this sort of goes to you're noting how technologically superior and accomplished Israel is. They were relying on technical means. There weren't any human beings on the border with Gaza, and those very few human beings that were found not far away were sleeping. You can't do that when you have an enemy the likes of Hamas.
So I want to speak about the enemy, the likes of Hamas, and its relationship with Iran and Iran's role. The more I've read about this and studied it and listened to our scholars, including Ken Pollack, the more I come to the conclusion that this isn't really about the Palestinians. This is about Iran's hatred of democracy, of freedom, of capitalism, and of Jews. But it really is not about the Palestinians. Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinians. Hezbollah doesn't care about the Palestinians. It's about just a hatred of Israel because Israel is a democracy in the middle of their world.
I think that's a really acute observation. It's very important. And I'm not going to be on the anniversary of October 7th the first person to say that the Palestinian people have been betrayed by their so-called champions in Iran and in Hamas and in the Palestinian Authority, because that's not my first take.
But I don't even think they're their champion.
But you are right. Iran will always fight to the last Palestinian, to the last Lebanese, and I think the same is true of Hezbollah. These are people whose main aim is not a Palestinian homeland; it's the eradication of the state of Israel, and that is that is not simply their goal, but that is a pillar of the regime.
And I agree with you completely about the anti-Semitism and the relationship of this to that. But there is a unifying theme that connects it to other parts of the world, in Ukraine and in China and in the Korean Peninsula. I mean, isn't there something about Israel being on the front lines of that worldwide battle now? Because Iran is now connected to Russia. Iran is sending oil to the Chinese. Isn't there a way of looking at this that puts Israel as sort of doing the hardest work in the battle for freedom in the world?
That's certainly how they would see it. Look, I mean, I think there are a lot of different puzzle pieces here. You are absolutely right that the reconstitution of what George Bush called the axis of evil has been a terrible threat. And you could look at the countries that make up this axis, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and say that the only two peoples who are pushing back on it in any meaningful way are the Ukrainians and the Israelis. Now, I would have liked to
Taiwanese Taiwan's there, yeah.
They're there.
Yeah. Okay, fair.
They're there. And
Japan.
Look, and they will be on the front lines. Yeah. And there's no question. Look, we're also doing a lot.
Yes,
I mean,
true.
We are doing a lot, but in terms of the active fight to diminish the capacity of these powers, I think there's no question that the Israelis and the Ukrainians are on the front lines. I just wish the Israelis were doing more for the Ukrainians than they are, because I think they have a shared enemy in Iran, which is arming Russia.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
But you know what, Robert? One of the things that we've been talking about as everybody contemplates the next step, which is an Israeli strike on Iran, which they've told them they're going to do, is are they going to hit that factory where they're making some of the drones that they're exporting to Russia?
That will be telling.
That would be great.
Yes, that would be great. Now, I'm glad let's talk about the military prowess. We have a great defense team here. We study this very closely. My first big world event was the 6-Day War, Israel's enormous success militarily against all of Arabia. And so I've always viewed Israel as the best. But
They've had that view too.
Yeah, but are they? I mean, are they the first round of missiles that came from Iran, they all were shot down. The United States helped a little bit, but Israel led that. Israel is clearly powerful in Gaza and powerful in Lebanon. But are you a little worried about their ability to keep this up?
It's a very fair question. Look, you had Ken Pollack on. Ken wrote a wonderful book. I was actually talking to my students about it today, called Armies of Sand, that really makes clear not just how bad, but why they are so bad, Arab armies.
Yes.
I don't know that we can say the same about the Artesh, the regular Iranian military, but I suspect that it's probably also likely to be true. So in that world, the Israelis are incredible. I think in most worlds, the Israelis are incredible, but they're a country of 10 million people. Their economy contracted enormously at the end of last year and in the first quarter because they called up massive numbers of reserves. You take people who work out of your economy, you take the boss, the management, the middle management, plus the grunts at the bottom out of your economy is going to suffer. So that question about the length of time that Israel can sustain these battles is, I think, very apropos. And it's interesting even more when you talk to people a few months ago, me included, and you asked what was going to happen next. Okay, once they finish in Gaza, what are they going to do next? Everybody said, okay, well, we know they have to go into Lebanon because the same kinds of brigade, the Radwan in Hezbollah, exist on the northern border as existed in Gaza under Hamas, the Nukhba brigades. And so the Israelis had to take them out. But as Hezbollah pushed them more and more and more, their latitude for pushing off that conflict got more limited. And I think the problem for them was they were forced into action. I think if they could have waited till next year, they very much would have wanted to. Now, of course, they have no choice, and they're in a two-front war.
All right, so we talk about the United States. The Biden administration has been characterized as sort of cautioning Israel to hold back or go slow or seek a settlement. And that's been frustrating for those of us who would like a stronger foreign policy. What's your take?
I think in the beginning, the Biden administration was great. After October 7th, so a year ago, I think the Biden administration was Joe Biden, the old Joe. The Joe Biden that I knew at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the 1990s, who is very much what I think you and I would call an old school Democrat, right? Not somebody who was drifting towards the far left. The person who actually a lot of people thought got elected in 2020, right, is this, not this crazy guy, not Bernie Sanders, but, Joe Biden, a representative of the sort of heart of the Democratic Party. And what it turned out, for reasons that we can only speculate about, but what turned out was that initial support for Israel, that full-throated support for Israel, dissipated so that by the beginning of this year, the administration started to slow roll critical ammunition, heavy weaponry. The administration started to lean on the Israelis in the way that America always does, because leaning on your enemies is harder. So leaning on your friends is the option available to you, and started pressing for Israeli concessions that the Israelis, frankly, didn't want to do.
But, we all know there's what the president says or what the Secretary of State says or the National Security Advisor says. And then there's a lot of things that happen that we don't see. And one of those is the use of military force and military assets. And am I right to say that, am I right to have some confidence that our men and women in military service have been pushed forward? And they did an operation against the terrorists in Syria during the middle of this, which no one paid any attention to. But what I would want to know is your knowledge of Washington and the way things work. Do you think the people over in the Pentagon are secretly more active in helping Israel than we know?
I think there are two ways of looking at this. Look, we always have more going on in the world than people know, right? We've probably got people in Yemen. We've certainly still got troops. That's public. We've got troops in Syria. Obviously, we have troops in Iraq, although President Biden is desperately trying to end that. And so in terms of what we're doing and what we're not seeing, I'm hopeful that we're doing good stuff. I don't think we're doing good stuff in support of the Israelis. I think we're doing good stuff in opposition to al-Qaeda and ISIS. And
what about helping and shooting down the missiles?
So where the United States has been most active is in the in the two Iranian direct attacks on the state of Israel, where the United States not simply used its assets in the region, but moved a whole carrier battle group into the region, actually twice in each instance, and definitely were engaged both in the air and from the sea with the interception of missiles being shot from Iran. The other place where we've been active is in a multinational coalition that is dealing with the Houthis and interference in the Red Sea. The problem there is, Robert, we at What the Hell is Going On, because we're called What the Hell is Going On, have an explicit rating. And unfortunately, you PG people don't allow me to use my full vocabulary in describing the nature of our operations against the Houthis. But yeah, we're not amazing. We have allowed this ragtag bunch of, drug-chewing Shia fanatics in Yemen to interfere with global trade to an extent that we've seen a tripling of the rate of insurance. We've seen basic goods rise in cost. We've seen the Bab el-Mandab effectively closed. And we, the United States, oh, and by the way, also the Brits, also the Italians, also others, have not managed to smash the daylights out of those Houthis.
Well, just one more on the Israeli prowess. Didn't they also just conduct an operation on the Houthis?
They
which was kind of
did.
a surprise. They were stretching a little even further.
They've been doing that all along, which has been very interesting to me because, in this case, they took along a CNN embed and they wanted everybody to see. But I think that they've also been overflying Saudi Arabia. And
which would be a big deal.
And that to me has been pretty interesting, yeah.
Well, you mentioned Saudi Arabia. I saw something today that they've announced that they're not moving forward with their settlement with Israel or their version of the Abraham Accords. So I think the MBS said something like, until there's a two-state solution. Where do you see them these days?
Look, I think they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They view Iran as an enemy just as much as the Israelis do. They are afraid of the Iranians. They loved the idea that in return for a normalization with the state of Israel, they would get a defense agreement with the United States and even what is called a 1-2-3 agreement, a nuclear cooperation agreement. Personally, I never thought that what the administration was offering was actually sustainable through Congress, but that's my Washington take. Look, this has had the effect that the Iranians intended of derailing Arab normalization with Israel. What to me is much more interesting is not what the Saudis keep signaling to everybody, 1 step forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 18 steps back, whatever. What's been interesting to me is to see that in these Arab League meetings that have taken place pretty sporadically since the outbreak of the conflict between Hamas and Israel, all of those countries that did normalize with Israel, the United Arab Emirates and others, have blocked any effort to force them to end that normalization. That shows the kind of commitment that they have to this. It's been very interesting, and I think the Saudis will get there. They're not there yet. I think they are. You spend a good part of a century educating your people that Jews are monkeys and that Israelis are murderers. It's hard to just turn it around on a dime.
You said something interesting there. You said that, you said that a peace treaty or some sort of commitment from the United States that had to go through Congress with Saudi Arabia would not get through Congress. What congressional interests would oppose that?
Oh, I think there are lots of congressional interests that would oppose that. First of all, a bilateral defense treaty with the Saudis. We don't have a bilateral defense treaty with Israel. I mean, we have a bilateral defense treaty with Japan. Saudi Arabia is in a neck of the woods that, I don't think everybody would be necessarily eager to leap back into, call me crazy, after the Iraq War and everything else. As much as I might be enthused in that direction, I suspect many are not. That's number one.
So you're saying, in a way, it could kind of be a combination of the isolationist right and the isolationist left.
No question. I think that great meeting of the on the far ends of the circle is a problem. And a 1-2-3 agreement, which is required under the International Atomic Energy Act, is for any country that wants to engage in nuclear cooperation with the United States. That is a big vote, and it is a vote for Saudi Arabia to have peaceful nuclear cooperation with the United States. I don't think there's a really big constituency for that here. So maybe I'm crazy. Maybe they could get it through.
You mentioned Iraq. And someone showed me a map the other day of the parts of the Middle East controlled by Iran, and it included all of Iraq.
Yeah.
It was kind of heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. It's more than heartbreaking. This was for us, I think, an opportunity. Obviously, we've made lots of mistakes in Iraq. We've had lots of missteps. We've had lots and lots of troops killed in Iraq by the Iranian forces or by their proxies. For me, there's always been an opportunity to help the loyal, patriotic Iraqi government do what it needs to do to distance itself from Iran. But every time they've asked, the United States has not shown up. Right? Our insistence on no longer having any involvement in anything except counter-ISIS operations, counter-Al-Qaeda operations in Iraq, has meant that we have let successive prime ministers twist in the wind when they have sought to take on Iranian proxies. And the result is that the Iranians who are next door and who are determined have really extended their influence and their writ inside Iraq in meaningful ways.
Okay, one more question about Iran for a second, or maybe not the one more, but I just have to ask this. They've been kind of humiliated, it seems to me. They didn't come. Hamas thought they were going to start a big war. It didn't happen. Hamas is destroyed, not quite, but we're almost there. Hezbollah looks terrible now, too. Their missiles are all shot down. So you mentioned Ken Pollock's book, The Armies of Sand, which I thought was about other Arab countries, not Iran as much. Mm-hmm. And I always had this worry that Iran was actually the one country that isn't Israel in the Middle East that could be an effective military force and a frightening military force. Are you doubting that, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, I doubt that.
You do?
Big time. Yeah. And we have long reason to do so. I mean, we watched them during the Iran-Iraq War as well. With an overwhelming population advantage, they still were not able to really decisively win. In fact, they ended up basically losing. But we also saw them fighting in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime. And even then, right, they needed to be on the ground because Assad couldn't do it and Hezbollah couldn't do it. And eventually they had to call on the Russians to do the job, and frankly, haven't finished at all. So I don't think the Iranian military is all that. And remember, it's important to understand Iran has no intention of getting in an actual war with anybody. Iran's forces are, I don't want to mislead people by saying that they are only for regime protection, but certainly that is their number one job, is regime protection and protection of their WMD assets, their nuclear, et cetera, assets. And you're exactly right. The Iranians have been humiliated. I mean, just think about this sequence of events, right? Okay. So, and for me, I'm going to just take a second to review it, but it's so enjoyable. Okay. First of all, we have IRGC, right? Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's elite military forces in Damascus. They're working with some of their more advanced weaponry in a secret facility, quote unquote, secret facility. And the Israelis come in, boom, off they went. Okay. A few months later, we have the man who is the number one military leader in Hezbollah, but also the guy who was one of the architects of the Marine barracks bombing back in 1983 that killed more than 240 U.S. servicemen and more than 50 French servicemen as well, and a number of innocent bystanders as well. Right? They are so paranoid, the Hezbollahis, that they have an internal cell phone system that is closed. It's a closed circuit, closed to outsiders. Shukr is so nervous about being taken out by the Israelis that his office and his home are in the same apartment building. He gets a phone call on the third floor where his office is, from that inside circle phone system, from someone who is persuasive enough to tell him, to get him to go up to the seventh floor, where he goes up and boom, bye-bye Fuad. Then they take out the beepers. Right? Yeah. Then they take out the beepers, and I don't know if you saw the story in the Washington Post about how that operation went down, but wow.
Well, the Israelis had set up a whole company to sell them this
supply chain. Yes, amazing. Yes. Then the next day, the walkie-talkies.
Yeah.
Ismail Haniyeh, I missed him. They take out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. There for the inauguration of the new president who they'd had an election for after Raisi died in a helicopter accident. And then, of course, on top of that, the April barrage and the most recent barrage and their total lack of success. In the first barrage in April, they injured a little Bedouin girl.
Barrage. I don't know this term, barrage.
Barrage, just a barrage.
Oh, barrage.
Yes.
Barrage. Okay.
Sometimes my pronunciation is not perfect.
Okay.
And similarly in this one, they killed this poor Palestinian schmo who was hit by a falling piece of shrapnel in a terrible bit of video that everybody saw.
Yes.
This is the ultimate in humiliation. Yeah. And the Iranians think that they can keep it from their public, and they all know.
Yeah.
You should see the memes.
Yeah, it's a tough, dangerous world, but Israel's winning, for sure.
They are.
Okay. Anything more about all of this that you want to make sure our listeners hear? That if you had one message to convey about what you think should happen or what you want to have happen, or some little detail, some fact that no one knows that we all ought to be educated about?
No, I don't have any secret great facts. I don't have any words of wisdom. I'll repeat what I said in the piece that I wrote this morning, and that is the great victory of Hitler was not murdering 6 million Jews. It was the people who he caused to collaborate with him. Right? It was the rest of Germany and Austria and Italy and others. And the great victory, and I really believe this is a victory, of Hamas and of the Iranians, is this uprising, not just in the United States, not just on campus, but in Congress, in academia at the professorial level, inside the United Nations, all around Europe, of people who have stood up in order to champion these murderers. That is their victory. And part of the reason they can be victorious is because good people like us didn't believe they existed, don't like to stand up and have these kinds of fights, don't like to call people out for being anti-Semites. And my message to everybody who reads our pieces, who listens to us, and who works with AEI is that time is over. Stand up, be counted, call them out, and also teach your family, your kids, and your community about what truth is.
Can't say it any better than that. It's all true. AEI stands for all of that, and will continue to do so. Danny Pletka, thanks for being here.
Robert Dorr, thank you for having me.
See you next time.